Lisa Abbott heads the Empower Kentucky initiative for the grassroots organization Kentuckians For The Commonwealth, which advocates on a range of issues that includes coal and water, new energy, economic justice, and voting rights. She's here at the Wilson Center today for a session conducted by the China Environment Forum titled The Uncertain Transition Away from Coal Stories from China and the United States. Lisa, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So let me ask you first about your organization and your project. What is the Empower Kentucky initiative?
Sure. Well, let me start with the organization and then the project. So I am a community organizer with a grassroots social justice organization, Kentuckians For The Commonwealth. We're 35 years old, and our origin story is in the mountains of Central Appalachia in eastern Kentucky, coal mining region. We are now statewide as an organization. We have about 11,000 dues-paying members. And our history and a core of our membership and sort of our organizational culture still is very affected and shaped by our early growth in Central Appalachia, working on issues related to coal mining and water. And as you said, we now work on a really broad range of issues. The Empower Kentucky project really has grown out of 3 decades of trying to work with communities to address some of the health and safety issues from both a legacy of mining coal, but also burning coal. Kentucky is a coal producing and burning state. And over the last 10 years, our focus has really been to try to shape solutions. What is a path forward that can be good for workers and communities, that certainly is better for health, that we think could be better for jobs than the sort of business as usual course we're on. So in 2014, when the Obama administration announced the Clean Power Plan, 2015, we had 2 candidates running for governor in Kentucky, both of whom said Kentucky will not comply. So it was clear that we had no political leadership to think about what is Kentucky's energy future. And so our grassroots organization said, well, maybe we'll try our hand at that. Maybe as a grassroots organization, we can host a public conversation in Kentucky about, is there a path forward that is better for jobs, better for ratepayers, better for health than the business as usual energy path? And is there a set of strategies that would allow us to comply with the Clean Power Plan, to do our part on climate change, and could be good for Kentucky? Because the dominant message is there's no way to address the climate crisis without harming Kentuckians. And we wondered whether that...
And you don't believe that's so? You think there's a way forward that you can achieve both? And I was sharing with you before we began recording that I'm the grandson of a coal miner, also grew up in a coal mining town, so I have complete affinity for the environment. And I know that, the town that I grew up in, Gilberton, Pennsylvania, is not coming back. The Gilberton Coal Company is not coming back in the way it was that sustained an entire community for decades. Give us some perspective on where coal sits in the U.S. energy equation and what's realistic in terms of whether it's turning back the clock and creating more jobs, or whether that energy is better put, no pun intended, toward new energies and new types of job growth.
Well, I think as your story is an example of, coal has
That's not unique.
It's not unique. And coal has been a really important part of our economy and our culture, and in many communities across the country, certainly in coal-producing communities. And that story is changing. It's changing in front of our eyes. And ready or not, the American energy system is undergoing a rapid transition. So right now, coal produces in the country, it's less than 40% of our energy use. It's down in the 30s and dropping. In Kentucky, we have been 90% coal-fired electricity for decades, 70 years. That dropped below 90% for the first time 2 years ago, and last year was at 82%. So even in a state, it's a rapid drop. And that is not being driven in Kentucky by policy change. We're not a leader in clean energy. That's market changes. That's the low price of natural gas. That is the fact that many utilities have now installed scrubbers, so they no longer need to buy the low sulfur coal that comes from Central Appalachia that they were buying at a premium. It was more expensive to mine coal in eastern Kentucky, but it was worthwhile for many utilities to buy that higher priced fuel because it was their least cost way to comply with the Clean Air Act. After installing scrubbers, then they can buy dirtier coal and still comply with those old Clean Air Act regulations. So there are a number of factors that have been driving, and now the increasingly low cost of renewable energy. So there is a transition underway, and from our organization's perspective, a real question is, can we shape that transition so that it produces the best possible outcomes for our communities and our workers? And is it just going to happen to us? And the coal jobs go away, benefits flow to other states, we're left with nothing? Or are there strategies that we could choose to deploy in a place like Kentucky to help people weatherize their homes so that their energy bills are lower and their energy demand is lower, help build out local distributed renewable community solar and other options that could be more locally owned and bring more benefits and jobs locally.
Speaking of the jobs, how does the plan address that? If you have a community where the tradition has been that the main employer is the coal industry,
sure.
How do the people who have worked in that industry transition to this new environment?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't want to give any impression that it's easy or that we have the answers. I think a colleague of mine says, we know a lot about what it takes to transition communities. It's just slow, hard, and expensive, right? And so there are promising sectors, there are promising strategies. No one of them is a silver bullet, and it's slow, hard, and expensive. But there are, I think, one of the most promising and sort of first steps that communities and governments, businesses can focus on is energy efficiency. Right, in the one coal town that I work a lot in eastern Kentucky, all the buildings were built by a coal company in 1920 when they built the camp for their workers. They're uninsulated homes, and the community has the highest energy usage per capita of any in Kentucky. Right, we're working with that town's leadership on essentially a revolving loan fund, where the town will pay for the houses to be retrofitted, get insulation and other steps to weatherize, and then that's paid back over time by the resident with a portion of the savings on their energy bills. And then that builds up the pot again, and it can be used on the next home, right? So there are very specific strategies that I think have a lot of promise, that create jobs, that improve people's lives and the value of their home, and have an impact on our energy system.
You're working in Kentucky. We think of other iconic coal states like West Virginia, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Can all of this be done on the state level, or is this going to take a national effort?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think we do need leadership from the national level, and I mean, it's sort of from top to bottom, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the ideas and the thinking needs to be informed by people living in the communities and by workers in those places, and very often, if there are solutions, we have a long history of outside agencies or governments imposing solutions, and it doesn't work so well. But when there is local leadership able to inform a plan, if we can align all the various players so that there is federal support, a state strategy, and local players on the ground working together, we have examples where that is working. Too often in Kentucky, what's missing are the state and local officials who, for a variety of reasons, it's been very hard for local politicians to talk about what's next in the economy because it's been seen as being anti-coal. Mm-hmm. And so one of the biggest challenges is just starting that honest conversation about what really is happening, what are we facing, and where do we want to go together. And if we can get that conversation going, then I think there is the possibility to pull in federal partners and agencies and really align resources in a way that is going to be useful.
I know it's difficult to generalize and maybe impossible, so just tell me if that's the case. But I wonder, what kind of feedback do you get from people on the ground, in the trenches, in the mines? Are they realistic about this in the sense that they understand that there's a different future ahead and that it won't just be keeping time frozen in place? Or are they resistant, and do they see moves toward new energy as just hostile to their way of life?
It's complicated. And I think it's probably a little of both. I do think that many people know that coal is not coming back in the way that it was. Employment in the coal industry has been in decline since the 60s. Largely, for a long time, production stayed high and steady, but employment was dropping. We lost more miners under Ronald Reagan than we have in the last 10 years, right? But that was explosives and mechanization happening, right? And now that's combined with other market changes, price of natural gas, price of renewables. So coal employment has been in decline for a long time, and I think most of us know that's the reality, that we aren't moving to a no coal future, but we're moving to a low coal future and to a low coal employment future. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anger. Politicians and the coal industry have been very effective at ginning up the blame game. But we have found if you enter those conversations to have a fight, you can have a fight. But if we enter conversations to say, what do we want for our community? Where do we want to go together? That there's actually a very deep willingness and even a hunger on the part of many people to have that conversation. What are solutions? And so that's the role that our organization tries to play.
I mentioned in the introduction that you'll be taking part in an event here talking about China and the U.S., comparing and contrasting. What can we learn from China?
Well, I have a lot to learn from China, so it's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to being here to do that. We have found that listening to the transition stories from other communities has been really important in beginning to imagine how do we want our own transition story to play out. So a couple of years back, our organization hosted a conference in Harlan County, Kentucky, and we had a parliamentarian from Wales where they had their own coal transition. We had a fisherman from Newfoundland. We had a tobacco farmer from Kentucky. Had someone from the Pacific Northwest in the forestry industry, all telling their communities' transition stories. And it helped open up a set of possibilities. It helped us, and I think people in our communities think this isn't just exclusively something happening to us, but economic transition is part of the human story and that we have a lot to learn from each other. So my knowledge of the coal transition in China is
I can ask you again in a couple hours.
You can ask me again in a few hours, yeah.
So you mentioned there are no silver bullets or magic formulas, but are there best practices that you could identify?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think so. And I'll tick off a few in my comments. One of the things that we learned from the fisherman from Newfoundland who came and spoke with us, he said, in times of transition, process matters. It really matters. Mm-hmm. So the importance of creating lots of spaces for workers and community members from all different parts of the community, including people and voices who are historically on the margins of power, right? To have a seat at the table and to have a say in helping to shape where do we want to go. One best practice. I think realizing that there are no silver bullets and really thinking about how do we strengthen, what are our assets and how do we strengthen sectors that have some promise. And each of those can be really complex, right? So energy efficiency and renewable energy, healthcare, arts and tourism, sustainable wood products, all of those have their own assets in our region and also their own challenges and complexity as you think about how do you scale that up and build employment and a resource base there. One of the other, I'll share this story. When I was recently in Australia learning from their coal transition stories, and we met with a member of parliament who represents a coal mining region, and he said, he gets elected with support from the Mine Workers Union. And he said, last year, the Mine Workers Union adopted a policy calling for a phase out of coal, a gradual, orderly, planned phase out of coal, which is extraordinary. That's very hard for me to imagine in this country. So then he said, so as a person who's elected to represent them, now I have to deliver. And to do that, I need three things. I need an honest conversation about what's happening in the industry and where is it going. I need a source of revenue, and I need good strategies to deploy that revenue. And I thought, I have yet to hear any political leader in the spaces that I'm in this country, have that kind of clarity.
Laser-like focus, yeah.
We need an honest conversation. It's going to take some investments, private and public. And it's going to take a set of strategies, and some of them will pan out, and some of them won't. But we're going to have to be really thoughtful about how we deploy it.
A final thought about the speed of change.
Yes.
With the need with political will that's necessary and all the things that go into it. What do you see as far as the trend lines? Is this something that's going to really gain momentum, this type of change and transition, or is it going to be fits and starts?
In terms of the energy sector, I think we are seeing, we're just on the tip of the iceberg.
Technology alone creates...
Technology and battery storage and the development of much cheaper renewable energy and distributed renewable energy. It will be fits and starts in large part, well, for many reasons. Who has the financing to access some of that? Will, there'll be businesses and communities that
scalability,
can scale it up, and there'll be, in the same questions about how do you bring broadband to rural places. Some of those will dog us. And then there are policy barriers. So in places, some states are really propelling and accelerating the drive towards cleaner energy sources and distributed energy, and then other states that I know well put up a lot of barriers. So it will be uneven, but I think there's no question what the direction is, what the trajectory is, the pace will be.
Well, Lisa Abbott, on behalf of my coal region friends and family, and near dear to my heart, this topic, thanks for your efforts.
Absolutely,
And thanks for
the opportunity. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.